Well, as I said yesterday, I think to one of your colleagues, Ian Duncan Smith's done more, if you like, to help people who claim benefits than Labour has done over the last 5 years.
Well, the canonisation of St Ian, Duncan of Smith is, I think, a little bit premature. There's lots of damage he has done. But returning to your points about the Chancellor, I mean, I think that really Ian Duncan Smith's resignation letter and that accusation within it that the decisions that were taken for political reasons and not in the national interest is a devastating accusation to make from a former leader, if I may say so, of the Conservative Party to a current Chancellor and Prime Minister. And I think George Osborne really, his future, if he wants to stay as Chancellor, I think he should rule himself out of any leadership contest, because everything in future, everything he does will be interpreted through that prism of, is this purely a political decision in order to advance his own leadership campaign rather than something that's in the national interest. And we have a situation now where 6 days after the budget, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is having to come in front of the House of Commons to rewrite his budget. There's a line there in the Red Book, £4.4 billion worth of expenditure, which he can't explain, or so far the government haven't explained, where that's coming from. Are they going to raise taxes in order to get that money? Are they going to cut other departments? They seem to have ring-fenced the whole of the Department for Work and Pensions yesterday in the Commons. What on earth is the explanation for what they're going to do in order to cover
In your
that?
mind, has the budget unravelled?
Boy, has it unravelled, yes. It's a total and utter mess. Dare I say, Joe...
No, I know you're going to say the Liberal Democrats have been in government.
Dare I say that both George Osborne and Ian Duncan Smith may be missing the Liberal Democrats, because it was decisions like this, the sort of big tax credit cuts last year, the PIP cuts...
You were happy to sign up to the so-called bedroom tax, though, weren't you, as Liberal Democrats, which is Labour claims have done endless harm.
Make some controversial changes,
Right.
But I can tell you, over the course of the last Parliament, there were a whole range of welfare cuts proposed by the Treasury, vetoed by the Liberal Democrats, and I think Ian Duncan Smith would probably still be in government had we still been there to veto this. I tell you the problem with these PIP changes, coming back to your question to Peter, I don't think in some ways it is the detail of the PIP adjustments. It is this contrast between a budget that cut capital gains tax generally for some of the richest people in the country, has hugely increased avoidance opportunities for people who've got expensive, well-paid lawyers, at the same time as imposing these very big welfare cuts on people on low incomes. And that has always been a blind spot for both George Osborne and David Cameron. It was throughout the last Parliament.
Is it a blind spot for Conservatives? I mean, is compassionate conservatism dead? Or as someone tweeted yesterday, was it ever alive?
It's not dead. It's always been alive. I was Secretary of State for Social Security and took these issues extremely seriously, and by and large I got by without any rebellions at all.
But you were famous for your little list as well.
But that was
pretty controversial.
That wasn't very compassionate.
Well, I wasn't compassionate about people who were taking money that was intended
Single parents,
for benefit.
I think, wasn't it? Was on the
no,
list.
it was people who were cheating the system, including politicians in that little list, who were using expenses claims wrongly. Now, but I was always in favour of getting the money not to fraudsters, but to people who really needed it.
Right, well, and on that basis, where would you get the money from? There's £4.4 billion. You would just add that to the deficit, would you?
Well, I mean, we're barely 1 year into the Parliament. We're barely 6 days after the budget, and the government can't even explain where it's getting the money from to cover its budget.
Would you
John
ring-fence
McDonnell, I think,
welfare?
set out very clearly what our fiscal rules would be if we get into power in 4 years and 3 months' time at the time of the next general election. But we're 6 days after the budget, and the government can't explain where it's getting the money from for its budget.
Would you support the idea of ring-fencing yet another department, which means there'll be more pressure put on other unprotected departments, and especially one with such a huge budget?
Well, it's clear that the balance in this budget was wrong. I mean, the compassionate conservatism, basically is the difference between rhetoric and reality. Compassionate is the rhetoric, conservative is the reality. And if you look at the budget, what it did was as David quite rightly said, it diverted resources away from the poorest in society towards the more affluent, and it targeted the disabled and those most vulnerable in our society. And that is the reality of the thinking. And it was, as Ian Duncan Smith quite rightly pointed out, a political choice made on the basis that these are the people who will vote for us.
Peter Lee, what was devastating was actually yesterday, following Ian Duncan Smith's resignation, was that his successor saying behind every statistic there is a human being, and perhaps sometimes in government we forget that. George Osborne forgot that, did he?
You'll have to ask Stephen whether he was directing his remarks to the Chancellor. I think he was saying that politicians as a whole can talk in big numbers and forget the individual people behind it. And it's important always to present what you're doing in the way it's going to impact on the vulnerable, the needy, the individual family and household, and not just as broad statistics.
On the money side, by the way, there is a simple solution to filling this gap, and it would be to drop the capital gains tax changes, which give away something like £3 billion.
Because that's been cut by 28 to 20%.
Opportunities. If that was cancelled now by the Conservatives, it would send out both a very positive message and it would fill that hole.
And of course, in 2010, George Osborne put up capital gains tax, saying that's what was needed to make the taxation system fairer.
Actually, there is as
part of the coalition deal.
Just
an
finally,
identity between the amount of money that the Chancellor had to find from curbing growth of disability benefits and the increase in our contribution to the European Union since its last budget.
Or
It's exactly identical, so we're saving money from the disabled.
so was it to keep Tory
Union.
MPs on
Good
board, do you
segue
think,
there.
with this? Anyway, we're going to hear a bit of the Chancellor from the House of Commons later in the programme.